Again, welcome to this teaching, The Quest of Edith Stein, to know, love, and live the truth, presented for St. John Vianney Lay Division and also through the Community of the Beatitudes. And we plunge into the life and the teaching of the saint. There's so much that we could say, but we're just going to take little tidbits and especially focus on Edith Stein's writings through this talk. And again, the link is in the chat box or through this QR code to the website where you can send in any questions and comments, both during and after the teaching, and where you can also sign up your interest for any of the discussion follow-up sessions that we'll have, both in person and on Zoom. And again, I recommend that you get on a computer screen rather than a phone. Find a quiet place away from distractions, grab some water, a snack, or coffee. Have a paper or a laptop to take notes. And I ask also that the Holy Spirit would speak to you through this talk, through the life of this saint. Our first thing we're going to focus on is her life, and then really her character that we see in her writings. And then this quest for truth that we see in her writings as well, getting deeper into some of her more philosophical and also theological quotes. So, as an introduction, I wanted to make reference to a few of the people who have inspired me to read Edith Stein, to know her, and then also talk about what does that mean when we say character of a saint, and then mention where are we going with her writings. Really, we're just getting a little sample. So, a few holy experts. Sister Prudence Allen was one of the first teachers we had when we founded the spirituality year here in Denver, and also subsequent a year following, they actually founded St. John Vianney Seminary. And Sister Prudence Allen is from the Reformed Sisters of Mercy of Alma, Michigan, and all of them have doctorates often in philosophy, theology, and or a medical doctorate. And she's an incredible philosopher, someone who actually had a life before her conversion where she was married and had a child. And both she and her identical twin both entered the Sisters of Mercy and became, really wonderful sisters and teachers. And she dedicated her life to the concept of woman. And she made, this is, I showed you the synthesis here, the book that published a synthesis in one volume of something that's several very long volumes of what is the concept of women, what is the philosophy of women, and then women philosophers. And so an incredible work that she has done to say, well, what is woman, and also she has a little life quest, just like Edith Stein, of saying, does woman have a specific soul? Is there something of woman's being that is specifically different? And so a wonderful sister who is living in Toledo, Michigan. I got the chance to just revisit her a few years ago and just see the joy that she still has in her heart and her eyes from being able to seek the truth and know Christ, who is the truth, and also to discover deeper and deeper ways that womanhood is something specific and a gift. Also, during my studies in Rome, I studied something called Christian anthropology. So it was like some continuing ed that I did after I finished my regular philosophical and theological formation. And Christian anthropology at the University of Teresa of Avila in Rome focuses on what is the vision we have of man, of man and woman in the light of Christ, in the light of Revelation, but also in dialogue with sociology, psychology, cultural anthropology, and what is the vision of man in St. John? What is the vision of man in St. Paul? What is the vision of man for St. Teresa of Avila or John of the Cross? And so incredible 2 years of coursework and then a thesis, and I loved all that we were learning about Edith Stein. We had a lot of specific teachings and a course on Edith Stein, and and there's a group of thinkers, of teachers who continue to work on the philosophy of phenomenology, and then also specifically on Edith Stein. And really the lead yeah, person in all that is Angela Alice Bello, an incredibly articulate and joyful teacher that I wanted to mention her. She isn't very well known or published in the English speaking world, but maybe she will be because so many of her works are, and just her articulation and the way she facilitates the dialogue of this philosophy and about Edith Stein is very alive in Italy in Italian. And then I want to mention François-Marie Lettel, who is a Carmelite who works for the congregation for the for in Rome that works on the canonization of saints, and he he received a phone call from John Paul II, for example, in the spring of 1997, and John Paul II said, "I want to make Therese a doctor in Paris when I go to World Youth Day in August." And so he had a few months to read Therese's writings and give the argument that Therese should be a doctor of the church. So, and he's, let's say, founded something that he calls theology of saints, and really saying that each saint is a new and unique expression of the gospel and theological source. And so we should study the saint's writings, but more than that, we should study the life of the saint. Let the life of the saint speak to us and speak the gospel in new and different ways. So I just mention them and give thanks to them with this talk. What is the character of the saint, or how are we going to cover something like that? We're going to speed through a chronology of her life, and then before we go too much into her writings that are more theological or philosophical, I love reading her autobiography, and so I think there's so much of just her life that speaks through the autobiography. So as Lettel says, okay, the writings of the saint may be amazing. Maybe Saint Edith Stein is one of the most important women thinkers of all time. We should read her writings that she's articulating truth. But when she's reflecting on her life and her autobiography, what a gift. We don't have that from many saints. And so just to read some of those candid passages, I think helps us to see her character and how that developed over time. So when we get to her writings, her thoughts, really, we're just going to have a few samples, especially from Finite and Eternal Being, which I want us to read a little bit together because I think it's very difficult to read alone or without some philosophical and theological training because it's using technical terms, but it's very deep and important, especially regarding the human person and gender, and also what is the life of God in our soul, what is in some ways a psychology in the light of Christ. Okay, and then a little bit of her essays on women regarding the nature of women, which I think we'll all find so pertinent for today. So just to recap what we've said so far, we are finishing our intro. We're going to dive into her life to get to her character, and then her writings, her quest for truth, have a few concluding remarks, okay? And let's move forward into the life of a saint. What was her upbringing, her studies, her service, her conversion, which comes later after a lot of her life has been lived, and then what was some of her career, a short-lived career, because as Nazism grew, she transitioned out of that career into the vocation that she desired from the time of her conversion, which was to be a Carmelite sister. But quickly the cross came to her in a deeper way as she was taken with her sister off to Auschwitz. Her upbringing, born in 1891, and Breslau is also Wrocław in Poland today. So it's the capital of Silesia, the region of Silesia, which used to be part of Germany. Her family was Jewish, more or less half-heartedly, more or less important, really important for her mom in a cultural way, and Edith Stein didn't take it too seriously, perhaps because her family didn't take it that seriously. She was one of 7 children. There were 4 others who died at birth or in infancy. And in 1893, Edith's only 2 years old when her father dies of sunstroke as he's working for his lumber yard. He's out in the forest. And mom takes over the business. So already this had an example of someone who was both mother to her children and a working woman, and took up both a lot of the manual work and the accounting and the business relationships of that lumber yard that was just behind in the kind of the lot behind the apartments where Edith grew up. In 1906, as an adolescent, she's seeking something a little bit deeper. She takes 10 months away from her studies and goes and takes care of her sister's kids. And during that time, her sister was into some feminism, and Edith, that makes a lot of sense for Edith. Just a world that doesn't necessarily have meaning through religion, but has meaning through yeah, working for women's suffrage and women's rights. And so it's during that time that Edith says, "Well, I really stopped considering religion as something true, but I was seeking a deeper truth and seeking, well, what is woman's place in the world, knowing how gifted and how much she liked to study and to be out in the world." So during that time, she gives up Jewish practice. She during her time of studies, it's good to remember, and we read this in her autobiography, how much she loved hikes and outings and the vacation times, even though she always had a book in her hand as well. This is her and her sister. Um, she liked dancing and strong coffee and cigarettes, but she really had this incredible upright heart. Anytime we see that things get a little too crazy, she steps out. No alcohol, no flirting, as much as she expresses here and there that she did have attraction. Or okay, 1911, she starts studying at the local university and discovered psychology, and then caught on to a new philosophy called phenomenology of Edmund Husserl, which is but it's taking on similar content as psychology, but really in a totally different way. Psychology, which is more empirical. Let's think about what are the different things that are happening in the human person, and what are the cause and effect within the human person, and therefore what are different disorders or tendencies psychologically. Whereas the phenomenology is taking on the person in the midst of their experience, like psychology, but really trying to say, well, through intuition, we see that the person grasps certain things, relationships, experiences, and understands them, and so it's a real different, but a similar, yeah, similar goal of psychology, but let's say from a totally different angle that's more grounded in or more in harmony with what we might call Aristotelian philosophy and metaphysics. There was a departure from metaphysics during the preceding generations of philosophy, and phenomenology in some ways recovers a relationship with being able to know the thing, to know truth, and not just have categories in our head or empirical knowledge of science. In 1913, she moves to Göttingen to study under Husserl himself, one of the fathers of phenomenology, and she gets involved with a phenomenology club there, and she also studies German studies and history. Okay, she takes a break from her studies, and I'm going to present several passages of her life during her time as like a nurse's aide, and she volunteers as an assistant. She doesn't have much nursing training, just a little bit to form her before she goes off into a field hospital for soldiers with these serious conditions, and she just has no fear. So I love diving into those writings because I feel like her character just shines when she gets into a situation that's in some ways putting into practice the deep morals and thought that we saw growing already. When she's out in the field, she shines. She comes back to her studies and graduates with flying colors, and begins to work more closely with Husserl, also because so many men were off at war or even dying, and so perhaps she got lucky, was able to move into such an important position because they were shorthanded, but also because she was gifted, and Husserl recognized that. We keep moving in. This is every once in a while I'm going to just throw in a quote to help us step back and maybe see also an image of Edith. You can see her on the left with her students. She said, "I lost the faith I had in my childhood, and I consciously and deliberately stopped praying." Okay. But she looks back on this and says, the thirst for truth was my only prayer. And I think that really challenges us to what is our religious practice and what is the deep longings of our heart and our mind to know the truth. Moving forward, her conversion has different influences, and some of that is the studies themselves, as she's getting to the deepest meaning and stuff of life through phenomenology. Phenomenology tries to set aside any biases and to say, well, let's just use our intuition, our common sense as we're seeking truth and know things as we see people, as we see things, as we see the world. And so she's able, in some ways, the whatever might have been Judaism, whatever might have been feminism, whatever might have been also other philosophies and psychology that sometimes wanted to say, wait, we can't see God's, therefore it's the human person is just made up of his psyche or and his body. Phenomenology tries to say, well, let's not have any biases. Let's just seek truth and see what we see. And so, for example, one time Edith steps into a church randomly in the middle of the day, and she sees a woman set down her groceries on the pew and start praying. And she sees something happening in this person. And phenomenology was training Edith to say, well, what's happening out in the world? What's happening in the human heart? What are the phenomena that we see happening? And she sees this woman having a relationship with God in her simple a woman praying in the middle of the day as she's doing her grocery shopping, and her heart is touched. There's something that just says there's something going on here, right? And so in some ways her studies were setting her up to see there's a human experience that goes beyond this world. She also had several friends, many of them new converts, also both Catholic and Protestant. And Max Scheler was one of the teachers, another father of these philosophical movements, who was Catholic and who set her up perhaps a little more for what Catholicism might be, but she wasn't convinced either way yet. She did her dissertation on the problem of empathy, which got into the question of relationship much more than Husserl had gotten into. Perhaps this was also something that helped lead her to faith, is that question of the person's relationship both with each other and if we're able to relate with God. And but something a real decisive moment happened when her colleague Adolf Reinach died in Flanders in the war, and he was also had also grown up a Jew, had been baptized a Lutheran, and his wife also a recent convert. And when he dies, Edith helps his wife Anna, young widow, to sort his papers and books, and she's spending time with her and recognizes, wow, this woman should be broken. Uh, in the midst of her mourning, how does she have such hope and joy, and even something that's transforming her love for Adolf and her meaning of life through suffering. So just to see someone suffer with meaning and with hope, and then this it's still up in the air. She's not, no one's pushing her. She's not in a hurry. She's not sure Protestant or Catholic, and she's at her Lutheran friend's home and like a kind of a family vacation home, and she just happens to pick up off the shelf Teresa of Avila's autobiography, reads it overnight, and says, "This is the truth." And immediately she goes to her first mass, finds a Catholic priest, asks to be baptized, and is baptized on New Year's Day, and soon after confirmed. So she's baptized and receives her first Eucharist, and feels a call, having read Teresa of Avila and that experience, that reality of spiritual life in Teresa of Avila. She says, "This is it. I'm called to be a Carmelite." But she takes on a spiritual director. She knows that's really important, and he guides her to the fact that no, she shouldn't jump into that, and she should continue to use her gifts for teaching. So looking back on that witness, we can look at some of her words, that witness of the widow Anna Reinach. It was my first encounter with the cross, with this divine force that confers on those who bear it. For the first time, the church, born of the passion of Christ and victorious over death, appeared clearly to me. At this very moment, my unbelief gave way. Judaism grew pale to my eyes, while the light of Jesus Christ rose in my heart. The light of Jesus Christ grasped in the mystery of the cross. This is why, when taking the habit of the Carmel, I wanted to add to my name that of the cross. So she's obviously saying this in retrospect, but we realize what was in her heart even in that moment. And then her first mass, this is interesting too. Nothing was foreign to me. It's her first mass. She's never been to, she actually tried to go to mass one time. She was on vacation with the Lutheran friend in that friend's hometown, and it was a woman who wasn't very practicing, and they did it was Christmas break, and they thought, hey, we heard that it's really cool, the Catholics midnight mass on Christmas. Let's go to midnight mass. And so they went to the Catholic church of the town at midnight, and there was a sign in front of the church saying, "Sorry, no midnight mass this year." So that experience of yeah, seeing the Lord in the Catholic Church and the Mass maybe could have happened a couple of years earlier. Anyway, this is Stein's first Mass. Nothing was foreign to me, she wrote, and I followed the ceremonies to the slightest detail. A venerable priest, Father Brightleg, parish priest of Begseburn, went to the altar and celebrated Mass with a profound recollection. I waited until the end of his Thanksgiving in order to meet up with him in the rectory. After a short conversation, I asked to be baptized. He looked at me with great surprise, telling me that a minimum of preparation was required in order to be admitted to the church. How long have you been instructed in the Catholic faith? He asked me, and by whom? The only reply I managed to stutter out was, Father, would you please question me? Isn't that amazing? I just feel like she's there was something so ripe, so deep in her heart that she had been seeking all these years. Moving on, she continues to study and to teach. Really, her desire was to have a professorship, which would have permitted her really more of a life of research and being a master. And because she's female, also because phenomenology isn't respected by everyone yet, she isn't able to have that. She needs, in some ways, to compromise and say, I need to focus more on teaching, which praise God because so many people benefited from her teaching, and she continued to help within phenomenology to help newcomers to step in. So she's really working as a tutor, and she continues to write articles and give talks about phenomenology. But more specifically, she's teaching at a high school and a teachers institute. And during that time, she's able to live and pray with sisters. She gets to know both Dominicans and Benedictines during that time. Also works, yeah, like I said, translations, giving lectures, traveling around, and makes another attempt to teach at a university. At that time, the question of being Jewish is on the rise in Germany, and she's denied because of that reason. She does become an official lecturer in Münster, but it gets even harder for her to teach. In fact, the Nazis outlaw teaching by Jews, period. Edith resigns, sees that as an opportunity to to open up to Carmelite life. She does write a letter to the Pope about the situation of Jews and Christians. But finally, on October 14th, the eve of the feast of St. Teresa of Avila, she is accepted into the Carmelite monastery of Cologne and takes the name Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. And in fact, as a sister, is encouraged to continue her research and writing, and also, yeah, the sisters and her colleagues have been urging her write an autobiography that you can publish so that people simply so that people will see that Jews are normal people. So that was her motivation for writing an autobiography. It's ironically it wasn't uh, anything of pride or just personal diary. It was, of course, she has those kind of notes as well, but the motive was just to be able to show that Jews are normal people, and so that's why it's called Life in a Jewish Family. It just really starts with her talking about what it was like, what her brothers and sisters were like, and then show that they're normal people. Kristallnacht happens, and at that time it becomes evident that it's more dangerous for her to stay in Germany, so she moves to the monastery in Echt in the Netherlands and composes the Science of the Cross, which is a reflection on Saint John of the Cross. And she says this is a picture of her final vows as sister, where Carmelites will be vested for the ceremony as a bride. And she says, I'm at peace with everything. One cannot acquire a science of the cross unless one begins to truly suffer of the weight of the cross. I said from the bottom of my heart, Ave crux spes unica. Incredible. Along with her sister Rosa, Edith is arrested by the Nazis. Weeks later, on August 9th, 1942, they're gassed at Birkenau, Auschwitz. 1987, she was beatified in Cologne by John Paul II, and he controversially says that she died of hatred for the faith, and that so in some ways identifying really the faith of the Jews. Yeah, there's something of faith of the Jews and faith of a Catholic that really can be identified as one. So hatred for the faith, but some people said, wait a sec, she died for being a Jew, not for being a Christian. Is that really a martyr? But the way she was declared a martyr, which meant she didn't need a miracle to be beatified. And then 1998, canonized. And then in 1999, together with Bridget of Sweden and Catherine of Siena, she is named co-patroness of Europe, okay, which means it's a feast day in Europe for her tomorrow. And in 2006, unfortunately it's kind of on the backside of St. Peter's, so it's not that visible for those who are visiting. But there's an enormous statue that was installed, and you can see the size of it. Just that's why I put the picture of it being installed, and you see the men. Is incredible, enormous statue. In some ways, honoring her as a particular example of patroness of Europe, because recognizing that the faith of Jews in Europe as something so important. Okay, before we move on to part two, a reminder to be on a computer screen. You'll be able to see the quotes better because the writing is going to get smaller as we do longer quotes. Make sure you're in a quiet place. You're welcome to hit the QR code or the link that's in the chat box in order to send in a question or a comment. So, part two, character of a saint. So these are just a few of the things we're going to cover. She's working, you can see her working on herself and trying and become a better person. What are the challenges of research? She's someone who is so gifted and yet still has, it goes through the desolations and doubts and difficulties that we probably all go through in some kind of studies. The determination she had to volunteer when the war was breaking out. And then in that field hospital, this incredible respect she has for everyone. We see in some moments of leisure how she really had a different perspective on leisure than the nurses and doctors around her. And so she valued that leisure and fellowship, but only the right way. And then her care for persons. And then we even see in some what I call her dating criteria in one passage of her life. Okay, she's working on herself, working on her virtue, perceiving others without criticizing. Someone with such an analytical mind, you can imagine she might be critical of other people. In her autobiography, she writes about others as she sees them, and she's frank and she's perceptive, and she recognizes their faults. And yet, how does she act on that? Or we see that she's able to do that with a real, a holiness and a charity. So this is a reflection on the relationship with her brother-in-law. We never again had a falling out such as we sometimes had during our student years. This is because I had completely changed my attitude towards others as well as toward myself. So we see there's an evolution of maturing that's going on in her. Being right and getting the better of my opponent under any circumstances were no longer essentials for me. How many of us can admit how much we'd like to be right? We see arguments and struggles, perhaps in our marriage, in our friendships, with our colleagues. Yeah, she realizes this isn't the path that I want. Although I still had a keen eye for the human weaknesses of others, I no longer made it an instrument for striking them at their most vulnerable. Isn't that funny that she just recognizes our tendency to, yeah, to criticize others and to judge them? Rather, I realize when I see their weaknesses, I can help protect them. Even my tendency to correct others did not affect my new attitude. I had learned that, so it's not like she's not gonna like she has this tendency to correct others. Is there a way that you can, maybe that's a gift you have if you're able to do it with sensitivity, right? I had learned that one seldom reform persons by telling them the truth. That that could benefit them only if they themselves had an earnest desire to improve and if they accorded one the right to be critical. Okay. And this patience we need to have, a relationship we need to knit, trust before we share critical words, right? Therefore, in these conversations with my brother-in-law, my prime concern again was to get to know him and his mother better, since their ways differed much from ours. This enabled me later to support Erna on many occasions. Amazing and so relatable to the struggle a lot of us have. Okay, later on, her struggle in her studies, simply to be a student and to work on a dissertation, I could continue reflecting even during meal times. And when I went to bed, I kept paper and pencil ready on my night table so as to jot down my thoughts at once. If they were to come to me during the night, she's trying to search for the thread that she's going to use in her research. I often jumped up because something had occurred to me in a dream that seemed particularly clever inside, but when fully awake, I wanted to give it expression. There was nothing left for me to grasp. On my way to the university, too, I kept brooding over my problem of empathy. I often spent a great part of the day in the philosophical seminar room studying. Sometimes I did not even break for lunch, but took along some pastry which I consumed for a brief pause during my labors. I read book after book, taking copious notes, and the more material I gathered, the more it was a whirl in my head. What Husserl, judging by his brief indications, thought of as empathy, and what Lips designated as such apparently had little in common. So she's trying to reconcile different thinkers, trying to find her line of thought, trying also to do this in submission to Husserl and his expectations, and she's lost, right? And we see how deeply she is trying to learn and to know and to perceive the truth and the difficulty she has with that, but the effort that she's put into that, which I think is a testimony to what it means to learn and to study. So often we're taking in information and spitting it back out, trying to work towards the proper evaluation or status and grades or graduation or and and not really seeking truth. She's seeking truth, and she knows that in this context of dissertation, especially, there has to be something personal, different, creative about it. And this really expresses what the way Stein is going to see education. Is there's it's not just about like studying, not just about looking at material information, but it's about learning, grasping, and trying, striving after knowledge. For the first time I encountered here was to be repeatedly my experience in every subsequent work. Books were of no use to me at all until I had clarified the matter in question by my own effort. I had to work at knowing it myself, right? Sometimes some teachers just say, read the book, give me the answers, memorize. But there's other teachers, certainly you've had and that I had, that said, okay, here's the problem, try and solve it, see what you can do, make your own effort, and then we'll talk about, what we can learn from the knowledge of books or of lessons that are already prepared. She says, this excruciating struggle to attain clarity was waged unceasingly inside me, depriving me of rest day and night. At that time, I had lost the art of sleeping, and it took me many years before restful nights were granted me again. Here are some of her masters. Husserl, Max Scheler, as I said, who was Catholic when he was teaching Edith Stein, and she found his, in fact, Husserl and Max Scheler both had teaching methods that Edith was very critical of. She thought sometimes they're all over the place, or they're not able to confront other thinkers, or at the same time, these are geniuses who are leading her deeper into the knowledge that she desired. Reinach, who's really a colleague, a partner in studying, or like an older brother for her in the study, and she had classes with him, but he was also somebody who was following Husserl. And then Heidegger, also involved in this circle of thought, and Heidegger in a way that is more what we call existentialism, which is a little bit different, let's say, more related to the human person's experience and relationship than Husserl was getting into. Husserl is a little more theoretical, we might say, but we don't have time to get into these nuances, but these are some of the faces. Husserl says, to know is once again to receive and to deduce one's law from objects themselves, and not to determine one's law and impose it on objects. So all these four thinkers in the school of phenomenology is a little bit break from what Immanuel Kant, who was probably dominating the German, a lot around and French, a lot of the world's thought at the time. Kant said that really there's something within us, these categories that we have that are ready for the object before we see it, and so in some ways I have an idea of woman, and I shape that idea of woman, and then I can project it and I'll recognize. Whereas this school of thought, phenomenology, says I need to come before the object. I have that experience of perceiving woman, and then I know woman, and there's a woman before me. It's not first of all an idea in my head. So, but this is what we call in philosophy epistemology, the process of knowing, of learning, of grasping objects. We don't have time to go into this, but I hope some of you are able to ask us questions and get into some of that deeper, those deeper questions, because they in fact have a lot of repercussions on our culture and our society and our thought. Now the war breaks out, and immediately she wants to go. She says, I was distinctly relieved when my mother sent me to bed to catch up on some sleep I had lost to traveling all night, but of course sleep was out of the question. Though feverishly tense, I faced the future with great clarity and determination. There's this great question at stake for the nation, and it's ready to, Edith is ready to recognize that importance, to drop everything, to contribute in whatever way she can. She says, I have no private life anymore. All my energy must be devoted to this great happening, this great event. Only when the war is over, if I'm alive then, will I be permitted to think of my private affairs once more. And I think maybe for a German to realize how much a Jew, how German Edith Stein was, and how much it meant to her to stand up for the nation, and to forget herself for that cause, something that sounds weird to us a little bit today in our time, when the love for nation, we don't want that to come before our personal security prerogatives and time, right? The next day was the Sunday on which we learned that the war was declared. So it was coming up. She knew that she was going to give herself to it. War was officially declared. Rose came to welcome me home. From her, I learned that a nursing course for women was being organized. I registered for it at once, and soon I went daily, and then she's sent off. Here she is in field hospital, uh, full of compassion, and a compassion that moves her with her gifts to open to the other and the way the other is suffering, to have that empathy, put that empathy into practice, and even to say, well, of course I'm gonna learn the other's world. I'm gonna try to speak their language. I'm gonna try to adjust to their culture. And she recognizes the differences between different cultures. Most of all, though, I liked dealing with the patients, even if this presented many a difficulty. So she likes the personal work, not just the service of the manual, this and that, but she likes to be face to face with these patients. And there were representatives for all the nations of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and I've heard that every official declaration of the government and the military in the Austro-Hungarian Empire was published in 11 languages, because there were so many different kingdoms, cultures, languages within the empire. They were considered all important and all had their dignity. Germans, Czechs, Slovaks, Slovenes, Poles, Ruthenians. Ruthenia is like southern Ukraine. Hungarians, Romanians, and Italians. Frequently, there are gypsies too. So a people that doesn't have a territory, but certainly has their own culture. In addition, there might be at times a Russian or a Turk. To facilitate communication between the doctors and the patients, a small manual in 9 languages gave the most essential questions and answers in daily use. I made myself thoroughly familiar with them. Incredible. Once I was on my way to the small tea kitchen, I overheard Dr. Pick say to Sister Emma, so another nurse, not a nun, Sister Emma, at a bedside a good distance away, watch, I'll bet she knows. Then he called to me across the entire ward, Sister Edith, how do you say sweat in Hungarian? Without making a pause, I called out the word he wanted. With these few fragments plus sign language, one managed to get along. So she says, no big deal. We should learn the minimum. And obviously, it's a challenge for others. Respect for each person, continuing in the same subject. The wounded soldier's total helplessness and the need for complete care made me particularly happy at my work. They need me, I'm ready for them. One soon learned to distinguish the differences between different nationalities and how they behaved. At the time, not a single one of the patients was from the German Reich, which all the other doctors and nurses, they're German and they want to serve Germans. She said, later I had a few. When we discovered one of our compatriots in a transport, we German nurses were jubilant. But once we had him for a few days, we usually became very subdued. These countrymen of ours were demanding and critical. They could upset the entire ward if anything didn't suit them. Those, on the other hand, from the barbaric nations, can you believe that? The Germans were referring to these other peoples as barbaric nations, were humble and grateful. I pitied them so, these poor Slovaks and Ruthenians, dragged out of their quiet villages and sent into battle. What did they know about the history of the German Reich and of the Habsburg monarchy? Now they lay there suffering without knowing what for. The Hungarians, okay, and so I'd say the two cultures that are valued the most are the Austrians, the German, Austrian. Austrian was the heart of the Habsburg Empire, so it was a German people and family, right, and not as much of a country. But so the Austrians, the Hungarians, or sorry, the Austrian, and the Germans are really a valued cultural language, and then the Hungarians as well, a really important and noble nation within this empire. But the Hungarians, so famed for their valor on the battlefield and so charmingly gallant toward us, made the most woebegone patients, so they weren't able to suffer well, they complained, whatever. So here is Edith with her team of doctors and nurses and assistants in the World War I field hospital that was down in Moravia, which is now Czech Republic. And we see the relationships she had with them. This is like on the first night she arrived at New Ward, and there's this huge party, and she's invited into it. She goes along with it, and she's really embarrassed the whole time, doesn't really have a way out. She says, in the end, nothing happened to me, nor had anyone even said so much as one improper word to me. So it's not like she was, disrespected in the midst of it all, but still trembling from revulsion. I was indignant that such behavior could go on under the very roof that harbored such critically ill persons. It had been out of the question to seek refuge in one of the wards. We were not to enter them when we were off duty, so she wasn't really allowed to get out of it by going into the ward itself. She's in the lounges and stuff. The following day, all the nurses who had been at the party, only the professional, not the aides, were called to the matron's office. They probably received a severe reprimand. I was worried that Sister Margaret, one of the other nurses, might think of me. I was worried what she might think of me for having participated. After all, she had spoken to me only for those few minutes on my first day. Aware that Gret Bauer often got to see her, I begged Gret to tell her how embarrassing my involvement in the situation had been for me. I received a kind reply. Matron wanted me to know she hardly regretted my getting such an unpleasant impression so soon after my arrival. So you see these judgments. I think sometimes we, so often we're thinking in our conscience, I don't know about this situation, what these other people are doing, but I'm part of this party. They're part of my group. They're part of my family. Hard for us to say anything. For Edith, it's clear in her heart. And if she has a way out, if she has a way to say something, she does it. She says, I was still trembling from revulsion. And if we have an upright heart, we shouldn't, we should have a reaction, a visceral reaction to sin, right? And to the situations of sin. Whereas compare that to Edith's heart when she's going into the situation of the ward where people are smelly, complaining, and suffering, and there's such hard work to do. That doesn't revulse her. For so many of us, we're revulsed by ugliness, smells, by suffering, right? And by old people, by hospitals. And I'll admit this for myself, visiting the sick and doing anointings in the hospital. I get a a guttural reaction before people who have tubes all over them and blood or old who smell. And I have to fight that revulsion. I don't want to have that, right? And yet, how easy it is sometimes for me to go along with something that might be before my eyes or conversations I hear. And so Edith has this upright heart. And look at how she cares for persons. Now I was caring for people, doing what I like to do. In the larger room, there were 9 beds. Almost all the occupants had compound fractures of the femur and were in traction. While they were in the large operating room, having their bandages changed, I had to make their beds quickly and most carefully. In fact, since they lay there so rigid and heavy. Upon their return, the weights attached to their traction apparatus had to be adjusted exactly so as to position the leg in the least painful way. Every change of position necessitated a change in the weights also. In the evening, I went from bed to bed to give an alcohol rub and to powder the areas where the heavy pressure might cause bed sores. A German sergeant, whose dissatisfaction and complaining gave us plenty of trouble at other times, said, "Sister has more work with us than a mother with 9 children." We just see she's going to speak later on about how the woman is made for mothering, how there's something of the woman's soul that's ready to care for others. The woman's soul is a shelter for other souls. And here we see it at work in in a different way, in a way of mission and service in this hospital. Now I need to so I'm just going to back up out of take a look at Stein's family for a second, just out on a picnic, and there she is in the middle, just to the left of the one who's got the baby. And I'm going to tell you a story that was hard to give you in a text. So I'm going to stop the screen share for a sec, and I'm going to read to you excerpts because it was kind of a long story with short quotes. But again, I hope you're able to throw questions and comments in here and there if you'd like to. And I hope you're able to take some notes because it's a lot of content, but especially that you're able to be inspired by this saint. So let's see. Show you the book if you'd like to see it. This is an old edition of Life in a Jewish Family, Edith Stein, but I'm actually going to read it off of the paper that I've marked up a little bit. So this guy, Edward Metis, is one of her fellow students. And I think this story just gives us an example of what's in Edith's heart in a way of chastity and in a way of relationship, that she is engaging in relationships. She's not afraid of men. And she does know that there's one way of relating to men that is friendship and camaraderie and collaboration. And there's another way that is romantic and discerning between those. And so, and also saying, well, what do I admire in a man? No matter what, who are the men that I would associate with? And they need to be men also who show themselves with an upright heart, a chaste heart. So leading into this, there's an event. She and this guy Metis are also doing some teaching, and so um, they're at a summer fest with their students and other teachers and their families. And towards the end of this summer fest day, that was held for all those who had taken courses with and for their families, there was. She says, in general, this kind of festival, I didn't care for this type of popular amusement, but we owed it to our students to participate. So she goes to this social setting, and I made the best of the afternoon, joined in the games the children played on the lawn, and when it got dark, the mothers and children left, and those who remained prepared for dancing. But maybe in dance that we see Edith dancing at other times, but this time of dancing that she's not going to feel, permit herself to participate in. I'm not sure why. She says this was the cue for my depart. This is my cue to depart. When I noticed Herr Metis, Herr just means Mr. When I noticed Mr. Metis in that he intended to leave, I suggested to him that we walk back to town. So it's evening. Let's walk back to town together. Should be accompanied. People were crowding the railway station coming home for the festival. I did not relish the prospect of sitting in a packed compartment on the train, and he was happy to oblige, so the two of us walked through the warm and moonlit summer night. And she recognizes there's something beautiful about it, maybe something that can be taken as romantic as well. She says, I do not recall what we talked about. For me, the silence on that lonely path through the fields was most pleasant. And both of us took a childlike delight in watching in the distance a train, the lights of which were alone were visible as the train glided its way through the night like some glowing snake. So just see her recognizing beauty in things and sharing that with someone else in the simplicity, even in the silence. And then on their way to the trolley, my companion remarked that the way home had been the best part of the whole day's affair. So this day festival, he says, wow, geez, really enjoyed our walk. Okay, later on, he yeah, expresses some interest in her. And he was also a Jew, and he was an only child whose overprotective, affectionate mother had, so far, anxiously kept him from all feminine companionship. And so later on when he says, let's hang out again, she can tell that he has an interest and she recognizes this is a courageous thing because he's coming from such a protective Jewish family. But she says they have an exchange of letters, and Metis suggested again by letter that together we attend a meeting of the town council when theater was going to be discussed. And this time I did not accept the invitation. Taking the opportunity in my letter to decline it, I made my position clear. I was accustomed to have a friendly relationship with my fellow students. I was willing to establish one with him, but he would have to relinquish any other expectations. She's not attracted, and she says, I'll be your friend, but I'm not interested in more. Let's make it clear from the beginning. This suggestion was accepted. My new friend succeeded in suppressing whatever budding attraction he had felt, and they continued to be friends. Okay, this is all just such real and interesting stuff of relationships and communication. Edward Menace was somewhat of a journalist as well as a student, and he would write for this newspaper that did book reviews. He would write book reviews. And once I found his comments on a volume of novels, I found a frivolous treatment of some erotic material. That upset me a great deal. I had formed this friendship with complete confidence that I was dealing with a true chaste person. Could I have been mistaken? If so, the friendship would have to end. I had no intention of associating with persons who were not completely beyond reproach in this aspect, etc., etc. So I decided to get to the bottom of this matter. The following day, when we met during our free period, the poor fellow had to listen to a proper sermon. Isn't that funny? Um, and when I'd finished, he explained that it had been extremely embarrassing for him to have to comment on these erotic matters. And he says, "Yeah, I just tried to do my best, and it was uncomfortable for me. I really don't want to do it." But he wanted to keep writing book reviews, so he did it. And at the end, she says, his sincerity was beyond doubt, so there was an immediate reconciliation. Finally, he said, "Oh, if only my mother could have heard this conversation." So I think in this relationship, we see that there's something of Edith who is so upright, says, I'm only going to have a friendship with someone who's chaste, says, I'm only going to have friendship that is on the right playing field and not leading, giving, mixed signals. And then when this comes up, when she has doubts about them, she talks to him about it and she gives him a second chance, right? Or even she's able to hear him out and believe him. And I just think it's a beautiful example of communication that gets to the bottom of it. She's seeking honest relationship. And one more moment in the context of a relationship I want to mention that shows um, Edith's take on Judaism at this time, because he's a practicing Jew, and so one time he goes, they're walking together, and she has to go in and grab something, and she hands him her suitcase, but it's Shabbat, it's Saturday, so he shouldn't be carrying anything, and she didn't think of that, and she comes back down, and she's so sorry that she made him hold a suitcase on Shabbat because they're not supposed to carry things on Shabbat. And he says, "Oh, I haven't done anything forbidden. Only on the street is one not to carry anything." And he was standing in like the breezeway to the door of the apartments. And so he says, "Well, technically, I haven't broken the law, even though I held a suitcase. You're not supposed to hold suitcases because you're not supposed to walk with them. But I didn't walk, and I wasn't technically in the street. I was in the breezeway." And she says this was an example of the Talmudic sophistry, which I found so repugnant. So we see what she didn't like about Judaism was this focus on all little exteriors of the law, and sometimes an obsession with them, Talmudic sophistry. And I mean, she doesn't give up on him for this, but she says one time she's curious, what is his religion? Is there a deeper side of this religion for him? And she says, I asked him once by letter about this idea of God, whether he believed in a personal God. Okay, and this is in like 1912. She asked him whether he believed in a personal God. His reply was succinct: God is spirit, nothing more could be said on the subject. And she says, to me, it seemed I had been handed a stone instead of bread. So we see a little glimpse of how in 1912, she has this question of, is God real? And is he something, is he personal, or is he just spirit? Is he just, yeah, beyond any kind of thoughts and relationship? Has he just given us these laws that we practice, in some ways blindly? And she asked him this question: Is he? Do you believe in a personal God? And what did she mean by that word personal? I think we can maybe see later on that she was looking for someone that she's going to relate to, and she'd heard about that in others. And here she finds a Jew. Perhaps they don't have this relationship and experience something living that she's looking for. It seemed I'd been handed a stone instead of the bread. He wasn't even interested in seeking. And to conclude this part about Herr Metis, Edward Metis, so later on she continues, be his friend and stuff, and meets his parents, and she says later, when I graduated summa cum laude, his written comment was, what was inevitable has come to pass. And it's like shows his perception of her was, man, she is the perfect student, and it's obvious she's going to get summa cum laude. So anyway, I think that's a little glimpse into the kind of relationships that Edith Stein had in this exchange and what she was looking for, how she was about relationship that's meaningful and right and good and true. It's 11:05. We're an hour into the teaching. We're going to take a quick 5 minutes, and you are welcome to ask a question, put it into the Google form. Maybe I'll mention some of those questions during the break, and just read them off. So if you want to put any questions or comments, I'll just read them. But feel free to just take a minute if you need to go to the bathroom or get some water, and I'll stay online and read those comments if you'd like. Thank you so much for your attention during this teaching. So we'll open up and see if anyone has questions and comments. You can also put them into the chat box, but I'd rather you put them onto that Google form using the beatitudesmissions.org/formation link that I've put into the chat box. And so the question came in, is the PowerPoint going to be shared? It's already shared. You can go to the formation webpage, and you can see the link to the Canva document to see the slides. Yes.
Oh,
The webpage link is just above if you go up in the chat box, but yeah, I can put it in again. Any other questions or comments? Go ahead and write them into the chat box or onto the Google form. And the books we are somebody asked if we'll have the references for the books, and so yes, the references for the books are on both on the slideshow, and so we'll get to them. We'll even have see images of the books. There's images of a couple of the books that are on that formation webpage as well. And again, the Google form is also to express interest, yes, no, or maybe for the 4 different moments opportunities we'll have if people want them to have a little discussion, question and answer over coffee or on Zoom. So here's a question that comes in from New Zealand. Did Edith Stein consider herself a fully accomplished Jewish Christian, or did she look at the Jewish faith and identity to be forgotten and to leave space to Christianity? So she really left Jewish practice. She didn't have too much interest in it, although when the Nazism came on, and whether or not it was because she was a Christian, she truly identified with her Jewish people. And when she stopped her personal practice and belief, she continued to go to the synagogue with her mother. And her mother, by the way, passed away like right during the ceremony of her vows, and she could feel her mother's presence in this special way, and her mother had just died hours before, and so we see that there was a deep link that she had with her mother, and she continues to respect that religion. And I think she didn't necessarily have the yeah take the time or have the time to go into too much of what that Jewish faith meant to her, but I think it crystallized in the Catholic faith. That she thinks she recognized right away in the Catholic faith, in the Christian faith, a fulfillment of her Jewish identity. So the identity she has with the Jewish people, she goes and dies with them in Auschwitz. She doesn't have any questions. She's not going to put herself aside from the fate of the Jewish people. At the same time, their faith and practice isn't something she's going to pursue in a different way as a Christian, at least not in a way of some certain religious practice. Perhaps in her personal prayer life, she felt her Jewishness and her connection, fulfilled in that way. But so we just to take a moment before get back onto the slideshow, I'm going to screenshot the phenomenology page that is linked on the website as well. And we can look at that together. Somebody's asking to clarify what is phenomenology. And it's true that it's not easy to grasp the significance of phenomenology unless we have a little more familiarity with philosophy and the history of philosophy and what it was going through during those centuries. But here's what I'll share, and this is just from some clarifications that I've done to try to simplify, and also things I've looked up. Um, So I want to read one more comment. Edith Stein sounds very direct in her relationships, and that helped her search for truth. Amen. Sometimes that's our problem is being superficial, right? And yeah, she's very direct. Being that direct can offend others. What do you think made her directness work? I think that's the gift of reading some of her autobiography is to see that in her frankness, she has a heart that wants to be honest when she has the opportunity. Doesn't mean that perhaps she had offended or put off people. I think she probably did a little bit. That's why she reflects on herself and saying, "Hey, I probably shouldn't be critical or correct others like I've had the habit of doing. I need to do it in a different way." And so I think maybe she is conscious that she needs to do something a little differently. But I think she realizes we're going to see in some more quotes the concern for the person and saying, oh, when we recognize somebody's weakness, that's a reason why we should care for them and protect them, uh, and not just doubt them or so. I'm going to make sure we are recording. Um, okay. And we're going to go to screen share of the phenomenology sheet, and then we'll continue on to the slideshow and teaching. So, what is phenomenology? The study of lived experience and conscious focusing on intentionality, bracketing life world. Okay, you probably don't understand any of that. Um, how things appear to us in our daily lives rather than try to just explain why they happen. So focusing on that moment of seeing, observing things, okay? Intentionality, the idea that our mind and consciousness are always directed towards an object or experience. If we're just daydreaming, we're not talking that much about truth. There needs to be some real experience that passes through our body and our senses, that passes through our emotions, okay, and that all right, the ideas in our head are formed by that and need to stay in relationship with that. That sometimes we get into reasoning and thought and philosophy that takes us away from the reality of how actually a child learns, for example. Sometimes theory really needs to be proven by our experience of the world and of each other. So bracketing means saying, well, sometimes we're coming into our studies with with the bias, for example, of for example, I'm Catholic, and that gives me a certain worldview. But in order to verify that worldview, maybe I should just say, well, aside from the fact that I'm Catholic, do I see the world? Do I, if my Catholic faith is telling me that women aren't capable of some kind of work or something like that, and maybe I have a bias. Maybe I need to see if women actually like that, if that leads them to happiness, if they're capable of that. Or let's say my religion or my philosophy says that black people are not human persons. That has happened, or there were certain Europeans who arrived in the New World and said these Native American, these peoples that we're finding, they're like animals. They're not like human beings. There might be a bias. Somebody might tell you something like that, and if you actually get to know the person or the thing, you would think completely otherwise. But there's a bias sometimes that we might have. We might say that I think sometimes Americans might think Muslims are all crazy. But when you actually meet a Muslim and talk to him, you might say, no, they're real people, and maybe they're living in error. They've been formed by an error, but maybe they're great people. So sometimes these are prejudices we might have, or the our faith might tell us that the world is flat. But if we go examine it, or even we just look up at the moon, we might say, no, I don't think the world is flat. So, setting aside biases and beliefs, prejudices, assumptions, in order to look at experience fresh and let the world speak, let others speak for themselves. So, this is like a moment of study that's going to contribute and maybe reshape, readjust the way we conceive of. We might think of something like sin. We might think of something like shame. We might think of something like Jesus's cross. Maybe I grew up with an idea of Jesus's cross that needs to be verified by actually what Jesus's cross is. So these are things we could apply in different ways. And the life world is the everyday personal world as we directly live it and feel it before just analyzing it. Okay, so people tell me that the light rail in Denver is really dangerous. Why am I riding it? And I tell them, well, come ride the light rail and see if you actually feel dangerous on the light rail. Maybe people told you it was dangerous because a lot of, smokers or, homeless people were there. Go and see if you feel dangerous, and maybe take a study and do things. Has crime actually happened on the light rail, or is that just a bias, right? Okay, here's some of these thinkers that all have different takes on phenomenology. Stein's focused on this problem of empathy. Stein defines empathy as the unique act through which we perceive and grasp the conscious experiences of other people. So that when we're experiencing the world, we're actually always in relationship with other people. And a child, for example, is so formed by the nurturing of their mother, and their relationship with that, their whole worldview and experience of the world is also shared with their mother. All right. Or we share that through friendship. We share that through studying together, not just studying alone. We share life through working together, not just working alone. So that's so much part of our human experience that, and we can almost feel empathy means like we might be able to perceive and grasp the way others experience because we have that gift. And especially women have this intuition of how others are feeling, and we share that together. And that's all but I just want you to see this document and you can go deeper. And yeah, we're not going to focus on that today, but maybe we can focus more on it in one of the discussion groups. We're going to hop back into our presentation. And yes, I called Stein's dating criteria. I really love that. We're going to move forward. This image, by the way, is a church near Boston where it's named after Edith Stein and that was vandalized, as you can see. And so there's some hatred for Jews that also comes back in our own country. So these are just a few questions you might jot down to think of when you have more time to think about it. Reflection questions related to the teaching we've had so far, and we can bring these up also at the discussion groups. But know that if you're looking back into the slides, know that if you want to say how does this apply, how do I digest this? Here are some questions to help. What virtues do you recognize in Stein's life? Can you name them? And can you relate to them? How does seeking truth equate with seeking God? Do you see that in your own life and other people in your lives who don't know God? Are they actually seeking truth? Or even for those who are practicing religion, do they need to be seeking truth in order to seek God? Um, how does Stein's life cast new light on non-Christians, for example? How can we yeah, regard them with certain hope and openness? And if we see that, well, if they're pursuing truth, they might be seeking God as well. But how does that reflect sometimes also us cradle Christians? Are we really knowing God, seeking Him, if we're not seeking truth ardently? And so let's move on to our just a reminder again that you can send questions or comments anytime through this QR code, through the formation link that is in the chat box. Recap of where we come from. We just learned about Stein's working on herself, challenges of her research, her wartime determination, her respect for each person, social joy, but only in the right way, caring for persons, dating criteria. Now we move on to part three, the quest for truth, and into some real thick passages of Edith Stein's thought. But first of all, let's have a little timeline. So here you can just read through really quickly some of these, the titles I gave to some of these passages we'll read. Let's move on into the timeline. Sorry, real quick. Anyone who seeks truth seeks God, whether or not he realizes it. This is the statue that's in front of that Carmelite monastery in Cologne, where Edith Stein entered and began her life as a Carmelite. Timeline 1911, she's in Breslau. 1913, we've already seen some of these dates. World War II, 1915. Then she is working on her doctorate for a couple years, becomes Husserl's assistant, spends that time teaching and lecturing. And then it's in some of that time of her thought really maturing, right? And she's already a Christian when she writes Finite and Eternal Being, which is one of the books that we're going to get into. Here's oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to do a presentation and not just the slides. But sorry. Um, if you're able to see me in the screen, this is the book Finite and Eternal Being. Super thick. Not sure if I recommend it unless you're having some kind of guided reading. She enters the Carmel, writes life in a Jewish family during that time before and during Carmel, and then in her very last year is finishing. Well, I don't know if she finished the whole thing, but it writes what we have of the science of the cross. Life in the Jewish family, too, is interrupted really prematurely. She hasn't even gotten to the part of her conversion and stuff. We know we have writings of her conversion through her letters and stuff like that, but that life in the Jewish family doesn't cover that much of her life, in fact. So, passages from a few of her other works. First of all, a passage from Life in a Jewish Family where she talks about the choice of her thesis on empathy, and then some passages of finite internal being, and then passages from Essays on Women, which is a collection of her teachings to those when she's teaching with the Dominicans to the in a school for teachers. So she's educating teachers. Here are images of some of these works. I particularly recommend Life in a Jewish Family and Woman because they're more readable. Life in a Jewish Family is it's a candid. He's telling her story, so she's not trying to tell the more exciting passage of her life. She's just trying to tell it all. So it's actually pretty boring, and I think it's great to read the life of a saint and say, "Wow, life of a saint isn't all excitement and heroism." And but to perceive in the little ways when she's just so candid. So I totally recommend to read, but just know it's not exciting like a novel. Um, and Problem of empathy is not easy to understand as well. Signs of the Cross, very deep. So I recommend these two in the middle to start with. So Stein speaks of this choice to study empathy. In his course on nature and spirit, Husserl said that an objective outer world could only be experienced intersubjectively. The person is never isolated, in fact, okay? We So there's a plurality of perceiving individuals who relate together in a mutual exchange of information. Okay, we're never alone when we're experiencing the world and learning. Accordingly, an experience of other individuals is a prerequisite. Okay, we come from our mother's womb. We grow up like being taught, being lived with. So Husserl gave this the name of this empathy, but what it consists of, he nowhere detailed. Here was a lacuna, a hole to be filled. Therefore, I wish to examine what empathy might be. The master found this suggestion not bad at all. And here we see the complementarity of the mind of a man and the mind of the woman in the same domain of phenomenology. Husserl had left this hole, which probably was better filled by the mind of a woman. Because it's a woman who probably understands much better what empathy is. Women are more sensitive to this, and they have this intuition, right? And they're made for that relationship because they bear children, right? Empathy, she says, is the unique act through which we perceive and grasp the conscious experiences of other people. Empathy is not just a psychological reflex. It's not just something that happens to happen to us. It's a fundamental way the human mind experiences the world. Okay, moving on to a little bit different subject, the meaning of woman. So let's dive into essays on woman before we do finite and eternal being. Okay, the meaning of woman in the light of eternity. She says, feminism perhaps is so concerned about women being able to vote, women being able to work, women being compared with men, even women in family life, and what's their role. And and Stein says, well, let's go all the way. Let's realize that the complementarity, the nature of man and woman need to be understood in the light of eternity. Let's go deep. Leading intellectuals are painting a shining ideal of feminine nature, and they are hoping that the realization of this ideal will be the cure for all contemporary ailments and needs. We are being obliged to consider the significance of woman and her existence as a problem that we need to solve. We are trying to attain insight into the innermost resources of our being. We see that it is not a completed being, but rather a being in the state of becoming. And we are trying to achieve clarity relative to that process. However, all of our being and becoming and acting in time is ordered from eternity, has a meaning for eternity, and only becomes clear to us if and insofar as we put it in the light of eternity. So as much as she likes to get into the details of men and women's traits and relationships and all the different social situations. And yet there's a plan of God from all eternity, and man's created an image and likeness of God, and man is destined to live with that triune God forever. And so, in some ways, we need to clarify who we are based on where we come from and where we're headed eternally, right? Especially if the question of woman has to do with who she is and not just what she does or what kind of human person she is. Okay. Stein is going to say that she thinks there's something of being a man or being a woman that we look at a woman, she says, and
Okay,
we don't say there's a feminine person.
okay, I'll get you some water.
So we're going to make sure that our oops, I'm just going to get everyone's mic off again. Somebody's talking there. Let's see. Participants, mute all. Mute, mute all. Okay. Okay, now we're back to sharing the screen. Bam, bam. Present. Okay. Yeah, so what I was saying is Stein said we intuitively, when we experience a woman, when we see a woman, or when we see a man, we say that's a woman, or we say that's a man. We don't say that's somebody who seems more feminine or somebody who seems more masculine. We might say that's a woman who has, more masculine tendencies, or that's a man who has certain woman sensibilities. But we say that's a man, that's a woman. Okay, and she's going to say that's something phenomenologically. We grasp that, we know that when we see it, right? And there's therefore, something of who woman is that is woman, who man is that is man, right? Not just like how they work or what they're like, okay? And if that's the case, is it from all eternity? Is it for all eternity? Therefore, is there a soul, an immortal soul that is man, that is woman? These are big questions that don't have an obvious answer. So, but let's go into some of these details, that help us to know better what does it mean to be woman or man. Woman naturally seeks to embrace that which is living, personal, and whole. To cherish, guard, protect, nourish, and advance growth is her natural material yearning. Lifeless matter, the fact, can hold primary interest for her only insofar as it serves the living and the personal.
What happened
Abstraction,
to me?
okay, I'm not sure why somebody's got their mic on, but be aware of that. Abstraction is alien to the feminine nature. Her natural line of thought is not so much conceptual and analytical as it is directed intuitively and emotionally to the concrete. So Edith Stein's somebody who had very good gifts for abstract thought and for analysis, okay? And we might say that she had some of these traits that tend to be more masculine. But she says the interest, even for her as a woman, is to relate that analysis, to relate those facts to reality and to the whole. Lifeless matter is interesting only insofar as it serves the living and the personal. Okay, she says this is what women is like. Is there a soul of a woman? Okay, can we speak in general terms of the soul of woman? Every human soul is unique. No one soul is the same as another. So of course there's something about the soul that is human, that is created by God, and that is unique. And there's my soul and there's your soul. But also, the deepest feminine yearning is to achieve a loving union, which in its development validates this maturation and simultaneously stimulates and furthers the desire for perfection in others. So there's something in us that we could say is the soul of a woman. That there's a deep yearning that we can identify in some ways with woman's soul. Such yearning is an essential aspect of the eternal destiny of woman. If our desires are deep yearnings, not just our emotional, not just our psychic drives, but if there's something so deep in our heart for loving union, for example, she says, well, this characterizes not just what woman does in this life, but what her eternal destiny is. It is not simply a human longing, but it's specifically a feminine longing and opposed to the specifically masculine nature. Well, it's a big question. This is what she says. Man's essential desires reveal themselves in action, work, and objective achievements. With men, the body has more pronouncedly the character of an instrument which serves them in their work and which is accompanied by certain detachment. With woman, the soul's union with the body is naturally more intimately emphasized. This is closely related to the vocation to motherhood. Woman's heart is formed ready for motherhood, even if she doesn't become a mother, and that'll be expressed in other ways. The task of assimilating oneself into of assimilating in oneself, so a baby, a living being, which is evolving and growing, of containing and nourishing it, signifies a definite end in itself. There's something that a woman is made for, made to bear children. Okay, and this forms who she is. Okay, a little quote from Edith Stein. Though totally dedicated to my work, I still cherished in my own heart the dream of a great love and of a happy marriage. So she says, people might thought I was just a student, but I knew there was something about me that is made for marriage, that is made for love and for childbearing. There's something, in me that was always a woman, and people might have thought of me as competing and doing well in a man's world. No, there was something in me that was specifically woman, and that I needed to identify as an aspiration towards a happy marriage. Okay, so moreover, this mysterious, we're continuing along this same passage. I'm quoting here and there from from a series of 4 pages in Essays on Women. The mysterious process of the formation of a new creature in the maternal organism represents such an intimate unity of the physical and spiritual that one is well able to understand that this unity imposes itself on the entire nature of woman. Okay, there's so much involved with bearing a child that there's it's what woman is made of, and that is reflected both in her biology but also in her being. Okay, whether or not she ends up bearing children and raising them. Man's endeavor is effective in cognitive and creative action. The strength of woman lies in the emotional life. However, where discipline of mind and will are lacking, so women has, this is some ways we can identify how these strengths of man and woman can also be a characteristic of their weaknesses. Where discipline of mind and will are lacking for women, emotional life becomes compulsion without secure direction. So in some ways, man and woman need each other to correct, and adjust and to be complementary. Only if its faculties are trained will the feminine soul be able to mature to that state conformable to its true nature. Wow, so in some ways, our nature is something that's always on the move, being developed, and we need to be in relationship as men and women in order for that nature to mature. Okay, so as we're reflecting on these passages, we might say, how would Stein envision healthy cultural and work expectations for women, or opportunities for women, or support for women? How would Stein assess today's norms and trends for education and upbringing? Maybe this is something that's evolved a lot in the past century. What would she think of it? How would she assess it? How would she correct it? What does gender have to do with essence, nature, and the soul? Wow. If gender has to do with our essence, our nature, how does that give us clarity amid the contemporary debates about gender options, rights, and fluidity? Can you change your gender? Can you have one gender but appear as another? How much are when we tamper with hormones and biology? But is there a deeper center that we're not able quite to get to? And maybe how also can we identify that? Well, you have men or women that may have a man who may have certain tendencies, gifts, sensitivities like a woman. Yeah, more we might say more feminine, and that's okay. There's always going to be variables like that, and degrees. Or a woman might have some very masculine gifts like Edith Stein had, and yet there's a core of their being that perhaps those gifts are even taking on new light. For example, a priest who has the sensitivity of a woman, wow, he's going to be great. That's going to give him a great, perhaps pastoral relationship, or good sensitivity and listening when he's hearing confessions. So even a woman can be a priest. So if a priest has certain women traits, that might make him a better priest. Or a woman who has so much to give in the workplace, maybe she has some of the gifts of being a soldier or a leader in the workplace. But in those positions, as a woman, she's going to treat persons differently, and she's going to have a different sense of relationships and of and with those masculine gifts, she'll bring them to the fore and with a different angle, right? Uh, just to remind us before we go even deeper into her thought, Edith Stein, this is the last image that we have, Edith Stein, when she's in the Carmelite monastery in Echt in Netherlands. Um, she says, "From my childhood, I have known that goodness is worth more than intelligence." Okay, and so as much as she developed her intellectual life, and we receive the fruits, perhaps it was something in her of her womanhood that said, "Well, there's a moral side of me that's more important, and my actions and my relationships, those are the most important thing, even though perhaps I'm spending all my time studying and writing and or using my intelligence to see God in her religious life. But there's a goodness, there's holiness, right? Who I am, my life that's lived, that is more important." Okay, now digging into finite and eternal being. I just love this stuff, and I hope that it can be a subject of some of our discussion groups. But it is hard to unpack these things because I chose some passages I thought were a little more accessible, and but even these have a lot of technical language. The personal I, the ego, the personal I, the self, is most truly at home in the innermost being of the soul. Okay, so this is kind of on a psychological level. She's not talking about faith yet, right? The I is most truly at home in the innermost being of the soul. Some of us aren't at home with ourselves. Some of us like flee ourselves, right? With media or flee ourselves into the busyness of work or into relationships because we're afraid of ourselves. We're not at home with ourselves. The personal I is most truly at home in the innermost being of the soul. There's a core of who we are that we need to be at home with. We need to be authentic and have an identity that we believe in, that we love, and that we're at home with. When the I lives its life in this interiority, when we recognize that we have a heart which is full of memories and intentions, and that's the place where we are free to dispose of and engage that soul's collected power. Wow. So we need to live in ourselves. We need to have an interior life where we're at home, where we're ready to explore that depth that we have as a person that we're created for, that will live on for all eternity. Personal life is so when we're at home in our soul, we can go out and become gift, she's going to say. Personal life is going out of oneself and simultaneously being and abiding within oneself. So our life is made of going out in love if we're able to, if we know ourselves, if we abide within ourselves, okay? And she's not speaking yet in a theological way, but this is certainly something we learn through our relationship with God, our deep interior life. Now she's going to say that the spiritual nature of the souls, of any human soul, is presupposed for its union with God. Each man is made for God, okay? So we can't talk about this inner depths of our soul without talking about its infinite aspiration for union with God that will only be fulfilled by union with God, okay? She says the human person, we can't talk about psychology as a Christian without recognizing that we're made for God. And therefore, this is something that we want to debate with those who are atheist psychologists or who want to talk about the human person or talk about medicine, talk about health, all these things that talk about the human person, even yoga. This is we need to have better relaxation and peace based on some kind of emptiness that is inside. No, we believe that the person is made for God. Grace calls for a personal receptive response. So grace coming from without of the self, God coming to us in his revelation and in his salvation calls for a personal receptive response. We're made for God, but then God has come towards us and calls us, knocks. It is a call or a knocking of God, and the person who is thus called is to listen and to open the door of his or her own self so that God may enter. Amen. Now, the more with God and at home in ourselves, the more we'll shine as individuals. We don't just all become one glob together. We don't just become all like each other. No, our holiness shines in our individuality as well. From the innermost center of the soul, there shines a light of the personal essence. Okay, this is something I referred to in my little gospel commentary on Thursday for the Feast of the Transfiguration. When we contemplate God's light and we're at home with Him, that light comes into us. We shine a light of personal essence. We shine a light of who we are that is really personal and individual. From the innermost center of the soul, there shines a light of the personal essence or nature, which is an involuntary emanation of the personal self. So even without meaning to, we shine. This shining, which issues from the person and captivates others, is the stronger, the more collectively a human being lives in the innermost center of the soul. Okay, we just celebrated Father Monsignor Ken Leone's funeral Wednesday evening and Thursday morning, and he was someone who captivated others. People were so attracted to something that shined through his soul, and people realized, well, he had such a deep prayer life, such a deep interior life, and such a deep, strong, authentic grasp of himself. And he was one of a kind. He was so, his individuality shined as he shined for others. The more this is the case, the more strongly and marked are all the free spiritual manifestations of a person's individuality. Since this individuality ultimately has its home in the soul's interiority, and each of us is different, each of us is who we are. Lastly, the more a human being is at home in the interiority of its soul, the stronger is the body impregnated with this inner life and spiritualized by it. In some ways, a person would be beautiful. People would say this about Mother Teresa, that she was, even in her old age, and she was wrinkled and she was tiny, and she had been through so many tough knocks. There was something that was so deep and so personal and so her personality that shined, and it shined through her body, even in her old age. Some people consider old age to be tending towards ugliness, right? No, she had something that was so beautiful and spiritualized. In some ways, her body emanated this light and emanated in a way that was very unique. Each of us is so unique, and our uniqueness will shine in a world of sameness, in a world of conforming to whatever Facebook we're in Instagram or TikTok or whatever shows we watch. Sometimes we're just combing our hair like them, want to be like them, want to speak like them. But the deeper we are in our inner self, the more free we are, and more we'll shine with our particular colors. And I think this is our last quote. Yeah. So the soul experiences the Trinity, okay? We are created by a triune God who is relationship. The divine life which unfolds in the God-loving soul can be no other than the triune life of the deity. For it is the triune God whom the soul gives its own self, to whom the soul gives its own self. We can't talk about God without realizing He is Trinity. He is relationship. He is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The soul surrenders itself to the will of the Father who generates the soul anew, and as it were, the Son. The soul unites itself with the Son. It desires to disappear in Him, so that the Father may see in the soul nothing but the Son. And the life of the soul unites itself with the Holy Spirit, and thus becomes an outpouring of divine love. The whole Trinity is at work in the soul that lives with God. It is quite evident, then, that the image of God that is found in the created spirit by virtue of the union of love, the gift of grace and glory, incomparably excels any mere natural image. So there is an image of God in which we are created that is triune. But then as we're living with the Trinity, as He's acting in us, that image becomes a likeness. That image begins to shine. It's not just a natural, image of God that is dignity, but it's an image of God that is alive with His love. The term image is hardly appropriate here unless we understand it in the sense in which the Son is called the image of the Father. We are dealing here with a genuine father-child relationship that we're catapulted into if we're truly living in that interior home, and the Trinity comes to make its home in us. That is all I've prepared for today, and we're getting close. Actually, we have a little more time, which surprises me. We can look at some of these discussion questions, and I'll look at the chat box again to see if there are any more questions or comments. But maybe we'll go back and we'll do some just summarizing these things that we've covered, and look at the resources as well. So first of all, these reflection questions on psychology and on prayer. How does Stein see the structure of the human person? Okay, a lot of times psychology will say, well, even Christian psychology will say, well, there's body and soul and spirit, there's memory, there's emotions. Um, well, Stein will say we can't talk about human person unless we talk about, first of all, this core deep in the human person that's made for God, right? The structure of the human person. We're missing something. It's something that the AA figures out that you can't help somebody solve their problems unless it recognizes a deep center of the person that needs God, right? And the structure of the human person made for God, and the structure of the human person that develops and does well, lives happily and harmoniously when we begin that life with God. How is Stein's vision different from modern psychologies? Like I said, that vision of including at the deepest core this need, longing, and relationship experience of God, and also her approach is saying, well, there is um, through phenomenology that we say a woman is a woman, a man is a man. We're experiencing the world and we're saying, calling things as they are. We're letting our common sense lead us and not just what modern psychology tends to do is say, let's take the empirical data that this person who came from this kind of a wounded family tends to have these problems, and because we recognize these instances several times, instead of being able to grasp the truth by looking at the person and examining that experience. So, first of course, the empirical data of science, which means recording what's happening here and what's happening here, and all those testing we can do. That's important, but for Stein, she had very little interest in that. She said, no, the core of it we can grasp by looking at the things themselves, talking to the people themselves, right? How does Stein integrate a vision of prayer with psychology? Like, I think she's saying there's a core of the person, yeah, who we could see these problems from the outside, tendencies from the outside, personality questions from the outside, or we can say, no, there's something that's going to shine and it's going to become more evident, healing that becomes more evident, personality that becomes more evident, complementarity and friendship becomes more evident when it's centered on what we're made for, which is God, right? When we have a prayer life that's alive, and when we have the whole person that is involved in our prayer life too, which means our body and emotions, letting them participate in that life of prayer. So I hope you're able to run with these questions a little bit. Again, these are some of the books that we've talked about, and there are more than that. I didn't put finite and eternal being on here because I think it's sometimes out of our grasp, but you can try on order. I think it's amazing. But I really encourage having Life in the Jewish Family or Essays on Women in on your shelf and picking that up and diving in and discussing. When we have a group of women 25 to 30 years old who are professionals and who are beginning to have families in our parish here, and we've been just trying to read some of Essays on Women and realize how deep these insights will speak to us today, 100 years after Stein. And so yeah, maybe some of the discussion groups we might have uh, after this teaching, yeah, maybe lead you into some kind of small group or to participate in that. Signs of the Cross, yeah, after grasping some of Stein's thought and this depth, maybe we are ready to step into some of her mystical life and the way she experiences and articulates Carmelite spirituality. Great. So just to recap again, yeah, that amazing life that and such a unique life that Stein lived as a saint who had that upright heart who was seeking through all of her life, but in ways that we see are very human in her interactions and her being in a family of a widow and lots of kids and different personalities. And it's even there's a couple pages of her autobiography that were removed by one of her sisters who didn't want us to know what Edith was saying about her. Wow, how candid she was. We have this amazing window into the life of a saint. Yeah, and the life of such a unique saint who had all these gifts of the heights of philosophy and a philosophy that also is really compatible and even leads towards the light of faith, phenomenology, and a life that was able to end in that culmination that the deepest saints have aspired for, which is to give their lives for their neighbor and for God's glory, and to share the lot for people, for us to have this relationship too with the Jewish people through Edith Stein. And the church tried to have a real intentional relationship with Auschwitz by building a Carmelite monastery right next to Auschwitz, and the Jews took that as something that was improper, and so the church decided to remove that. But wow, I think Stein has led us into, and probably Maximilian Kolbe as well, some of these saints who lead us into how we share in that horrible happening of World War II and of the Holocaust. And so she's certainly a window in and a way for us to relate, have that solidarity. And so we remember her and remember through her Jewish people, the respect she had for them. And but yeah, I think what I wanted to shine through this teaching the most is just her character that we see in her interactions, and in that life she lived, and that readiness she had to go off to the field hospital, in her perseverance, in a way of learning that for us is sometimes foreign. We're not used to having to seeing students who see that process of creative learning and making the material their own, and finding their own insights. Is that showing us a whole different methodology for our education? I think that's a whole question that certainly reading essays on women can open us up to how we're educating our children, both in the home and in our schools and our sports or scouts. And we just want to continue to build on this quest for truth that she had. I hope that Stein in the English language and in America continues to inspire us to go deeper into what we're able to know, how we're able to know the world, and how we're able to realize, wow, that deepest insight we can have about the human person is through also recognizing the yearning and the capacity we have for God, that we're made for God, and that we also made for a God who is Trinity, who is relationship, who has given himself through the fulfillment of the Jewish prophecies in the incarnation of his Son, Jesus Christ, and in the gift of the Holy Spirit. And this is shared with us, that love of the Father. So I encourage you to order one of these books if you want. I hear the titles again. If you want to put a question or comment again into the group chat, or into the here's the QR code, or you have the beatitudesmissions.org/formation that can give you access to the question, comments, or these different follow-up resources. So this whole presentation is available on that webpage. That document on what is phenomenology is on that webpage. The essay that I wrote on the nature of woman is there, linked. And then also this article about Edith's life. It's a summary. There'll be a revision for you, and has a lot of these photos, the child of Israel. And I hope that you follow up with more teachings from the SJV lay division, and some of them free, some of them enrollment, and some in person, some online. If you go to denver.beatitudes.org, you can see the different times you might like to come and pray with our community, a community that was founded by married couples, and that has both always a household of religious men and a household of religious women. And so we're at St. Catherine of Siena Parish, and this is an example probably that Stein would have found really interesting, of the shared gifts of men and women in a lived out community life, and also the shared gifts of the celibate vocation and the married vocation. And so that's something you're able to taste both in our prayer, or having a meal or a retreat with us. And we have a special prayer evening that we'll do. Is more or less the same prayer evening that we'll hold both at St. Francis Cabrini here on August 1st, and then at St. Catherine, on October 1st, on the Feast of St. Therese, and then on October 2nd at St. Catherine of Siena, what we call Rose Petals. So that is linked on the website as well. And we'll go to the website to finish, just so you see these links. So you can click straight on these. Okay, click for the Google form for questions, comments, or to give a yes, no, or maybe for some of the follow-up sessions at coffee shops, or or even one of the follow-up sessions will take place at a little restaurant down the street from St. Catherine's, and then follow up with praying, chanting our Vespers on a Saturday evening. So to see all those options, you can click here, and to see the presentation, this is the link. To see all these different links, just click on the line. And then this is the Zoom link for the follow-up that will be August 22nd, next Saturday at 2:30 p.m. on Zoom. But the first follow-up possible session is coffee at Park Meadows Panera tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Anyone is welcome. And here's the Rose Petals Evening information on a pilgrimage to Israel that we'll hold this fall, and Hebrew lessons, some other options to pray with the community. So, and some other talk recordings. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really been a joy for me to be motivated to dive in again to all this great material. And I pray that you're able to follow up both with some study, but also with examining the way you live and the way you're called to a holiness that is really particular, special, personal to who you are. So the more we go into that home of ourself, the more that inner self will shine for the world. So we'll close in prayer in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for each of the saints in our church, in our spiritual communion, that we're able to have both as companions and inspirations, and as a little foretaste of the heavenly relationships that await us in your kingdom. And so we pray that, through that Eucharist, through the Mass that Edith Stein recognized with those depths of her hearts, we want to recognize also your fulfillment of the promises, your fulfillment of why you created us. We give you thanks for that Eucharistic communion we have, the chance we have to adore and to have you in the depths of our soul, in the depths of our bodies. And so may we each become that temple of your love in this day, and may we each shine that light of your Holy Spirit, and first of all in who we are, and then of course in our relationships and all of our actions. And Lord, keep us all safe in this day. May Almighty God bless you all through the intercession of Saint Edith Stein, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks again.